Thank you so much, everyone, for coming, braving these frigid, cold weather. Anyway, today we're going to take a tour of the Magdalen Islands, Les Iles de la Madeleine, also known as the Maggies. And then you're going to walk a little bit of the Prince Edward Island Walk with me. So here we go. So to begin with, we had to meet our tour group on a specific day, and we decided to go a day early because of the cancellations and flight delays. Knowing where we were going to meet our group originally, I had booked some hotels close to our destination. Then, as the weeks progressed, our meeting point was changed to the Rod Charlottetown Hotel. It turned out that we were about 4.6 kilometers from our meeting place. But anyway, we left our meeting place and we walked to the Rod Charlottetown, close to 5 kilometers. And the reason that we walked is because we were actually on a walking trip of PEI. We were carrying backpacks. We did not have any other luggage with us. And so we walked. And so we got to our hotel about, I don't know, our meeting time with the tour group was at 4 o'clock. We got there early. There's these two old women that walk into the Rod Charlottetown with our hiking poles and our backpacks. And this young gentleman is looking at us from the door, and he came and said hello. Turned out that he was the CEO of the Rod Charlottetown Hotel. And so he took us way up to the very, very top, where you see that balcony up there. He actually gave us a tour of the hotel, took us to the very top, and we took pictures from there. Then he actually gave us our room keys, and we settled in. And later we met our tour group. But anyway, so the Rod Charlottetown was built in 1931. It was a CN hotel at the time. It was bought by the Rod family in 1982, and even Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip stayed there, and so did Arlene and I. So there you go. Anyway, that day happened to be the grand opening of their newly renovated patio at the Rod Charlottetown. And so the CEO invited us to stay. He said that there was going to be entertainment from 3 to 5. And so we did, we stayed. And it was Will McConaughey. Will is a singer of classic tunes, and he was very good. We really enjoyed it. And so then we met our tour group at 4 o'clock. And they put us on a bus and took us to Lobster on the Wharf, where we really had to work for our supper. Being landlocked Albertans, we do not dig into a big live lobster every day, so it was a good thing that we weren't famished, because food doesn't come easy. That evening, after our supper, we were taken to the Confederation Center of the Arts to see the Jersey Boys. The Jersey Boys were 4 sons of Italian immigrants from a tough working-class neighborhood in New Jersey. They came together to form the iconic 1960s rock group, The Four Seasons. So you may remember Frankie Valli and The Four Seasons. And 2 of their favorite hit records, Sherry, I'm not doing it too well, Big Girls Don't Cry. The next day, our tour bus drove us to Souris, Prince Edward Island, where we boarded the ferry for Les Iles de la Madeleine. Now, how did Souris get its name? And you're probably going to pronounce it Souris. Anyway, Souris is the French word for mouse. It was given that name due to the plague of mice in 1724, 1728, 1738, 1749, And those mice actually devastated the crops of the early settlers. And so you can see on the map there, Charlottetown is kind of in the middle, and then that star over there is Souris. And that's where we took the ferry for Les Iles de la Madeleine. It was a 5-hour crossing, so you can imagine where Souris is, and then the Magdalen Islands are up there. And they are owned by Quebec, so there's going to be a lot of French words in there. They're an archipelago of 8 islands, and as I said, they are owned by Quebec. And so, we were 5 hours on the ship, and we had supper there in the ship's restaurant, and I ordered mussels and sauce. And this is what I got. Not a vegetable, not a salad, not a potato, nothing. Mussels. Nothing. But there's a little dish of sauce up there. Anyway, they were good. And then we arrived at Cap aux Meules, which translated means Grindstone Island. And there's a star there where it shows where we are. It is the second largest of the 8 major islands. And so the next morning, we were taken on a boat trip of the Caves and Cliffs. It was the Caves and Cliffs tour. Now you can see those huge concrete structures that are up there. Their purpose is to break the waves, and the cost of each one of those structures is $6,000. The name Grindstone Island, or Cap des Meules, it was named that because the inhabitants used stones to make grinders for their axes. And so it's called Grindstone Island. And the first European to set foot on the island was Jacques Cartier in 1534. This is a typical picture of the shoreline. A lot of erosion happens from those cliffs. Another typical site. Reminds me a little bit of Newfoundland. And so remember I said this was a cliffs and caves tour. And so we came across several colonies of cormorants. There were many colonies along our boat tour. And you can see in the picture there that some of them have their wings spread out. And that's because those birds have to dive underwater to catch their food, and their wings get waterlogged, and then they can't fly. And so they have to get back on land, spread out their wings to dry them out, and then they can start all over again. Some caves that we saw. There's another picture of the caves showing a little bit of the land beyond that. And then we had a lesson in lobster fishing. And this one is really alive, and he's huge. It's kind of scary, actually. And so our Caves and Cliffs tour ended. We were on the Beatrice Hubert boat, and that's Arlene just getting off of the boat there. And then we were taken on an excursion on a bus tour, actually, of the islands, and Gilles Lapierre was our guide. So we were taken, we saw the island's salt mine. It was pointed out to us. We didn't go right to the site, but it was pointed out to us. And we were told that the main economy of the islands is commercial fishing, tourism, and salt mining. And so the Magdalen Islands are floating on 7 salt domes. And these domes were discovered in 1972. The rock salt is mined and has been mined since 1982 at a depth of 300 meters in tunnels under the sea. And the salt is used for road de-icing. The islands are connected by bridges or causeways that are built on sand dunes, so we were able to go to all of the islands without taking a boat. We were told that there are no homeless people on the Magdalen Islands. We were also told that the life expectancy of healthy seniors is 100. We were also told that there are no fences. Nobody builds fences around their property. Everybody trusts everybody else, and there's no stress. And apparently that's the reason why people live so long, unless they're ill, of course. And we were also told that the red fox is the only large animal on the islands. Other than that, there's squirrels and rabbits and mice. So we were then taken to this church, St. Peter's by the Sea. It's an Anglican church. It's in the hamlet of Old Harry. We're now on Grosse Île, which means Big Island. This church was constructed between 1916 and 1917 using wood from the many shipwrecks that are strewing the shores. And here we are again. We're showing you up there, Old Harry, the hamlet of Old Harry. So that's on Grosse Île, the Big Island. Now we're still on Grosse Île, and we were taken to Old Harry Beach. Now, that beach has 8.5 kilometers of singing sands. It is one of the 10 most beautiful beaches in the world, according to National Geographic. And the Magdalen Islands have 300 kilometers of beaches, or 187 miles. Now, the reason for these singing sands, the sand is from the erosion of the cliffs, and it contains minute particles of quartz that have been bleached by the ocean and the sun, and when you walk in it, it has this singing sound, and it really works. I did walk on it, and it does sing. Then we were taken to Les Iles. These are dry sand dune ridges that are held together by vegetation and separated by damp troughs. They are situated on the island of Havre aux Maisons, or House Harbor. Each ridge hides a sand dune formed parallel to the beach, so you can kind of see the ridges of the beach there. And the ridges represent the ancient waves on the beach. Now, what we saw, and we were not able, the bus didn't stop, and so I didn't get a good picture. This is a picture from the computer, and I have to apologize, because what we saw was actually fields of wild trees that looked like they were planted in rows. It's amazing, because where the trees are growing, then it's a ridge of sand, and there's nothing that grows. And then there's another ridge of trees. Like, it was amazing. It was like they had been planted there. This is another picture where you can see it kind of follows the ridges of the ocean there. But I really apologize. I even emailed Prince Edward Island to see if I could get a picture of the Sillon, but I couldn't. And so here we are. By now, we are Old Harry Beach, you can see over there. And then we came down to Havre aux Maisons, House Harbor. So we're coming back down. So now we're still on House Harbor Island, and we were taken to a winery, Le Barbocheux Winery. This is the owner, Léonce Arsenault. Barbocheux is a slang word in French that means a guy who drinks too much. And he kind of looks like it. Excuse me for just a minute here. Talking about drinking. Okay, so here is Léonce giving us a spiel about his products. The locals call the beverage La Bagosse. Remember, everything's in French. Or in English, the beer of the islands. But it's not a beer, it's really a traditionally home-brewed wine. And in years past, it was the only alcoholic beverage available on the islands. And we were all given a little tray with 5 little glasses in it, and we sampled the different flavors of La Bagosse. And mine was that red one right in the very middle there. That was really good. I don't know if it's raspberry or strawberry, but it was very good. And then we were taken to La Fromagerie du Pied de Vent. It's an artisanal cheese factory. Pied de Vent means foot of the wind. This cheese factory was established in 1998, and they own a herd of 60 Canadian cows, and I'll tell you a little bit more about them in a minute. Each cow produces 16 to 19 liters of milk a day, and 950 liters of milk per day are transformed into cheese. And we were invited to taste the different cheeses. And here are the Canadian cows. They are the only breed of cattle developed in Canada. They're the only dairy cow farm on the Magdalen Islands. In the winter, the cows feed on dry hay. In the summer, they graze in fields of wild plants without chemical fertilizers or pesticides. And so you add a pinch of salt carried by the wind, and you get a taste of the Magdalen Islands. Then we were taken to this church. It was built in 1900. It's an expansion of the original built in 1876. The back of it there is the original part, and then it was just added on to. It's the second largest wooden church in North America, and it also was built with wood from the shipwrecks, and it is designated as a historical monument. And we're back on Grindstone Island. So there we are, Cap aux Meules, Grindstone Island. So we were taken inside the church. Saint-Pierre de la Vernière is the name of the church. The altar there took 4 years in the making, and it was carved with a jackknife. And then this was interesting. There's nothing special about the wood on this church pulpit. It's only after it was built that the parishioners saw this image. So they can actually see the image of Christ. So if you see over there, there's kind of a line like a halo, then the face or the head, the body, the 2 arms that come out, and then the feet. And then we saw this sculpture. It's called Les Pêcheurs, which means the fishermen. It's a sculpture that's molded out of concrete, and it pays tribute to the rugged, independent breed of fishermen who help fuel the island's economy. And another church that we were taken to, Notre Dame du Rosaire, Our Lady of the Rosary. It's also called the Fisherman's Church. It was built in 1967, and its design is reminiscent of a seashell. And then it was pointed out to us, the fishing net that's hanging there in the front. And the doors of the confessionals that are like the doors of a boat. And the Stations of the Cross that are like the waves of the ocean. And of course, you can't go to the Magdalen Islands without going to a lighthouse. And then we were taken to La Grave on Aubert Harbor. Grave is the Maggie's colloquial language. It comes from the word grève, which means pebbly and sandy terrain. La Grave is a historic site on the islands, and those buildings are all boutiques and restaurants and cafes. So you can tell the architecture how old it is. Another picture of La Grave. We actually walked down the street and went into some of the shops. And there we are. Now we're back on, here is La Grave, back down there on House Harbor. And here is one final photo of Les Iles de la Madeleine, or the Magdalen Islands, or the Maggies, as some people call them. So then we were back on the ferry, headed towards Souris again, and this couple happened to be people that were on the tour of the Magdalen Islands with us. So we're on the ferry, and they're asking us what our plans are from now on. And we told them that once we get to Souris, we're going to grab a cab or a bus or something, and we're going to make our way to Summerside. And they said, well, get on with us. We live in Summerside. So that's Gerard and Elizabeth Greenan, who live in Summerside. And so we did. Got a ride right up to their place. And so, I told you that then once we got back to Prince Edward Island that we had planned on walking part of the island. So to give you a little bit of history of the walk, a fellow by the name of Bryson Guptill actually walked the Camino de Santiago in 2016. And he came to the conclusion that walking around Prince Edward Island was about the same distance as walking the Camino de Santiago. And so he did some research, and he started designing, and he mapped out some walks, and he actually then walked the entire walk. And it is about 700 kilometers if you start at one point anywhere and go all around and come back. And on that walk, there are existing trails that were there before. There's red dirt trails, and there's a lot of walking on the shoulders of secondary highways. And it's now also known as Canada's Camino. And so the Greenans dropped us off at their place, and it was actually only about a block or maybe two to where we had booked our night for the first night in Summerside, the Willow Green Farm. And this is the backyard. And so the next morning, we started our trek from the Willow Green Farm. It was a 15.4-kilometer trek from Summerside to Kensington. And we walked, this is what we walked, the Confederation Trail. Now, this trail was developed in the 1990s, and that's when Canadian National abandoned the railways in Prince Edward Island. They took the rails out, and it became a trail, and they called it the Confederation Trail. Directional signs on the trail that tell us which way we're going and where to go. And we saw a profusion of wildflowers that we did not recognize, flowers that are not here in Alberta. There's a close-up of what those look like. I never did find out what they're called. A sign that was on the trail. Among other things, it said to keep to the trail, respect private property, guard against the risk of fire, and absolutely no littering. And the trail is very clean. And the potato fields that were all in bloom. That was pretty spectacular because we don't see that here. And this is actually a quote from my traveling partner, Arlene. If you're awake, hello. Arlene said, and I quote, "Other than physical act of attempting to progress forward by alternating your feet, hiking and backpacking have very little in common." So I'm going to tell a little story about Arlene, and I hope she still talks to me after this presentation. Arlene is one of the busiest people I have ever met in my life. You cannot pin her down for 2 minutes. She's always on the go. Tried and tried to pin her down before we left on this. Have you got a backpack? Are you? Oh yeah, anyway, I did pin her down for about 2 minutes at my house. I showed her my oh yeah, I've got a backpack. I'll need a little bit bigger one, and it's okay. And she was gone. And so it turns out that, well, first of all, we walked that 15.4 kilometers, and we got to Kensington, where we were going, and this was the haunted house that was there. But Arlene is carrying her backpack, sometimes on her back, sometimes in front, sometimes under her arm, because it's not a backpack. She had a day pack. And a day pack, the weight is all on your shoulders and on your back, and it kills you walking 15 kilometers. I was tired too, not on my shoulders and my back. My legs and my feet killed me. I'm way too old to do this stuff anymore. But anyway, so we got to Kensington, and our place to stay was the Home Place Inn. And it says no vacancy there, but that's because we already are reserved. And this is the house that we were in. And I don't know if you can see in the patio there, there's 2 red dots there. Those are patio chairs, red patio chairs. So we got there, and Arlene actually flopped herself on one of the chairs, and that's where she stayed for quite a long time. I, on the other hand, had booked the place, and so I had to go in and do whatever has to be, and they showed me around in the house, and so that was our first night. That was our night in Kensington. However, once we were there, we still had to go have supper, and again, we're still on foot. And so we left, and we came upon this, the Kensington Railway Station, which was built in 1905, and it's now a National Historic Site. It's actually also where Anne was picked up by Matthew in the story of Anne of Green Gables. So if you've read that book, that's where Anne was picked up. And it served as the passenger station in Kensington for almost a century, and it's now a restaurant. So that's where we had our supper. And just across from where we were having supper, just across there, from the veranda of the train station, there was the Sherman Centennial Gazebo. And there was music, the Summer Music Series 2024. And it was Kelly Mooney and Katie McCary that were entertaining, and they are singer and songwriters. And we just happened to be there, and it was free. And so now we're back at the house in Kensington. So to tell you a little bit about the Hitchcock family, the owner of the house is Greg Hitchcock, and he's the taller fellow, the young fellow there. He and his wife, Angie, who happened to come from Rocky Mountain House, as a matter of fact, they owned that place. But Angie died in June at the age of 59 from complications in her lungs. So we never even did get to meet Angie. So when we got there, because Angie had become sick, Greg's parents came from New Zealand, and that's Judy on the other side there and Keith right beside Greg. They came in May to help their son and to help Angie. And then Greg's sister, Carol, came from Australia. And so that was now the Hitchcock family that we met. And so Carol made us some Anzac cookies. Anzac stands for Australian and New Zealand Army Corps. They are a healthy cookie with rolled oats and coconut, and they were sent by the wives and the women's groups to soldiers abroad because the ingredients do not spoil easily, and the cookies kept well during naval transportation. And so we snacked on them in the evening, and then we took some with us the next morning when we left. So the next day is Thursday, July the 18th, and we had planned to walk just over 18 kilometers to Stanley Bridge. So from Kensington to Stanley Bridge. But according to Greg, it's very hilly terrain, and again, because they saw us get there the day before, half dead, Greg said, there's no way that you're walking these 18 kilometers to Stanley Bridge in this hilly terrain. 3 of us here can drive, and somebody is going to drive you part way. And so they did. The next day, it was Greg's dad, Keith, who drove us just over 14 kilometers to New London, which is the place of Lucy Maud Montgomery, her birthplace, and she's the author of Anne of Green Gables. And so he dropped us off there, and we went inside the house, and then we walked the remaining 3.6 kilometers to Stanley Bridge. Nice choice rather than 18. This is the house that Lucy Maud Montgomery was brought up in, and we actually got to tour it. And this is our walk to Stanley Bridge. It was on the shoulders of this highway. Very, very hard on the feet, very hard on the legs, walking on cement. You can see the sign there that says Stanley Bridge. And you can see the hill. It was hilly. Again, the ditches were dappled with white yarrow, another plant that is not common here. I think we probably put it in our gardens, but there it grows wild. We finally got to our motel in Stanley Bridge. There was nothing special about the motel. That's Arlene sitting there. But we had a nice view from our back door. The next day, Friday, July the 18th, we had a 15.7 kilometer walk to North Rustico. So from Stanley Bridge up to Cavendish and down to North Rustico. And again, we were totally on the highway, on the shoulder of the highway, until we got to the national park, the Prince Edward Island National Park of Cavendish. And then we were on a nice sheltered path. And that's me with my backpack. One of the signs that we saw there in the national park. And the trail led us to the sand dunes. So those hills there are sand. There are 4 kilometers of sand dunes that protect the New London Bay from the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And so this little bridge is there so that we don't walk on the sand dunes because it tells us not to. And here we are coming out of dune lands. And then we were back on pavement. However, this was a little bit different in the sense that they had a 2-lane sidewalk that you can see there where people are walking. And then there's the ditch, and then there's the highway. So we're still walking on concrete, but at least we're not right on the shoulder of the road. And we finally got to the North Rustico Motel and Cottages. That's where we were going to stay for the night, our B&B, and every night we kept notes of what happened during the day, and I quote from the notes that I took that day, and it said, "I don't think I have ever been this tired." And so we got there, and Heather and Dwight, the fellow in the middle, and his wife are the owners of the motel. And they saw us coming. And then they inquired about our plan for the next day, which was to walk another 15.5 kilometers to Brackley Beach. Now, Dwight just looked at me. He shook his head. He went outside. He came back in with that other fellow. His name was George. And he made arrangements with George so that George would pick us up in the morning and drive us. So you can see the pattern here. 2 old women with their backpacks, dead tired, and they've got another 15 kilometers the next day. So they make friends, and we're taken to where we're going. Actually, it turned out really well. So that was from North Rustico to Brackley Beach. That was going to be our walk the following day. However, George took us in his car, and he didn't only take us straight to Brackley Beach, he actually took us sightseeing. And this is an oyster farm. The oysters are tumbled in cages that are rocked by the waters of Rustico Bay, and we were told that it takes from 3 to 5 years before the oysters are mature. And you can see the yarrow growing wild in the fields. He then took us to the Doucette House. This house was built in 1768. It's possibly the oldest dwelling in Prince Edward Island. It originally also served as a focal point for the religious life of the locals. Mass was held there in that house by a traveling missionary, Father James MacDonald. And the first occupant of the house was Jean Doucette. George then took us to the Farmers' Bank of Rustico. It was in operation from 1864 to 1894. It was the first community-based bank in Canada. It is the precursor to the credit unions. It's a Father Georges Antoine Belcourt, who, on arriving in Rustico, noted the lack of education and extreme economic hardships of the inhabitants, And so he and his parishioners constructed the building. And then they were able to make loans at a decent price for the inhabitants who lived there. We then drove by St. Augustine's Catholic Church. It was built in 1838, and it is the oldest parish church in the Diocese of Charlottetown. And then he finally took us to where we were going to stay for the night, and that was at the Baywatch Lighthouse. And he dropped us off there, the Baywatch Lighthouse at Brackley Beach. This is it. Our room was on the second floor, and these were the stairs that we had to navigate to get up and down there. And just across the road from the lighthouse, well, to begin with, in order to get to the beach, we still had another 3 kilometers to walk because the lighthouse is not on the beach. And so we crossed the road on our way to the beach, and then we noticed the nest up there, a falcon's nest. So that was pretty neat. And then, of course, we headed out towards the beach, walking. Now, before I go any further, I'm going to fast track back to the Magdalen Islands. So there's the story of Randa and Alma Melanson. They were on our tour at the Magdalen Islands. And the first night that we were there, we had a tour group supper, and then we were just mingling around. And this woman comes up to me with her phone and takes a picture of my name tag. It said Olive Frenette. And it startled me, and she said, "My name is Frenette. My family name is Frenette, and I never see it anywhere, so I have to take a picture to show that there are other people called that, and I'm going to send it to my siblings," she said. So anyway, Randy and Alma live in Cornwall, Prince Edward Island. So back to Arlene and I walking to Brackley Beach. We're walking along the road, and there's traffic coming and going both ways, and we're not paying too much attention, but this one little car went by, obviously, and then they noticed who we were, 2 old women walking to Brackley Beach. Anyway, they turned around and came back and parked their car on the side of the road where we were. Well, if it doesn't turn out that it's Randy and Alma Melanson. They recognized us from when we were on the Magdalens, and of course they knew that we were going to be walking in Prince Edward Island. Now they were traveling in a little 2-seater sports car, so they could not give us a ride. But they turned around, went back to Brackley Beach, and told us that they would meet us there, and which we did. We finally got to Brackley Beach, and there they were, and we spent the rest of the afternoon with them. We got to wade in the waters of the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and then we had to walk back, of course, to our motel, because they only had place for 2 people in their car, and that was the 2 of them. However, they did offer to pick us up the next morning. So again, we did not have to walk the next day. So on the way back to our to the Baywatch Motel, we stopped for a bite to eat at a restaurant, and there was a gift shop there and a beautiful garden, and that was a mulberry bush. I don't think I had ever seen one, but we were told it was a mulberry bush, and so of course it brought back the memories. Here we go round the mulberry bush, the mulberry bush. And so the next day we were going to walk from Brackley Beach to Dalvey by the sea, which was 12.6 kilometers. And then we were going to take a bus or a cab or something from Dalvey down to Charlottetown, because that was the end of our walking However, the Melansons offered to pick us up, and for them, they live in Cornwall, so it was a 24-kilometer drive for them to come and pick us up at Brackley Beach. And then they told us that they were not going to take us to Dalvey by the sea because there was nothing to see there, they said, but they took us touring. And the first thing that we got to see, this by now is Sunday, July 20th, and we got to see the Confederation Bridge. It is 8 miles long, and it is the longest bridge in the world that covers ice-covered water. So it's not the longest bridge in the world, but it's the longest bridge in the world over ice-covered water. And here was the Marine and Rail Historical Park. It's a monument that it tributes to the captains, and there's a picture of the captain up there. The captains who ferried the people before the bridge was built. And you can notice all the tiles around this monument. They document the names of every single person who worked on the Confederation Bridge. So it would be interesting to read them all. And of course, there's a lighthouse out there too. And this is the old train station that used to service the island before the bridge was built. And that's Alma and Arlene. And one of the boxcars from the old CN train. And on the other side of the road from the park, there's the Confederation Cove building, where mussels are processed and shipped all over the world. So if you bought a package of mussels here in Red Deer, they would come from that Confederation Cove in Prince Edward Island. And then we were taken to the farmers market, and the Buddhist monks were there selling their farm produce. And don't I fit in well? And then we went to the Cow's Creamery for their renowned ice cream. And that's Alma and Randy with Arlene and I. And then they dropped us off at our hostel, which, guess what the name of that hostel is? The Backpackers Inn. And again, we were on the second floor and had to climb and descend these steep stairs. So that night, Arlene and I went to see Anne and Gilbert. It is based on the Lucy Maud Montgomery books, Anne of Avonlea and Anne of the Island, which are her second and third books in the Anne of Green Gables series. And the story follows Anne's journey to adulthood and her romance with her high school academic rival, Gilbert Blythe. And this was at the Florence Simmons Performance Hall. The next day was Monday, July 22nd, and it was a free day for us. And so we were just walking around killing time, and we happened upon the Micmac heritage actors who were sharing the history of their people on the island with stories, songs, and dance. It was at the outdoor amphitheater at the Confederation Center of the Arts, and it too was free. Another picture. And again. And so then during our walk around town, we came to this crossing where it was St. Dunstan's Basilica. Such a beautiful, beautiful piece of work there. And so we stopped to learn a little bit more about it, and we were told that there were 18 bells. There are 18 bells in that basilica that were manufactured in France. They were installed in 1928, but due to structural issues, the bells were removed in the 70s. And with the support of donors, they were refurbished and reinstalled in 2017. And the chimes still continue to be part of the culture of Charlottetown to this day. And then that night, our last night on Prince Edward Island, we were back at the Confederation Center to see Anne of Green Gables, which we had both seen before, but we still had to see it again. The next morning, the Melansons again drove from Cornwall. They left at 4:45 in the morning to pick us up at the Backpackers Inn, and they drove us to the airport. And so all in all, we had planned to walk about 77 kilometers of the island walk. And with the help of friends and neighbors who kept picking us up, we only managed to walk about 41 kilometers, which still isn't too bad for two old women. And that, my friends, is it. Thank you.